1789, the French Revolution, and the French aristocracy were meeting the guillotine. The British aristocracy looked across the channel and thought, if that jumps over here, we could be for the chop. What do you do when you're frightened? You run to church, get your Bibles, start praying, and that's just what they did. The aristocracy had time and money. Not too many people willing to go out there, but they had the time and the money. But fortunately for us, and strangely enough, over in Prussia, what's now Germany, there were plenty of people willing to come over. And, thank you. And one such person was a man called Joseph Frey. And he came over to work with the Missionary Society, because the aristocracy had started the missionary societies. They realized that when they read their Bibles, that wars and rumors of wars were going to happen just before the end. And they thought this, therefore, could be the end. They knew that the gospel then had to go out to every ethnic group across the world. And the other thing was, the Jewish people must return to their land. And they started these missionary societies in 1792 with the Baptists, and then it continued. And by the time Joseph Frey got here to work with the church's ministry with the London Mission Society, he was doing a really good thing. But as he was walking around in the East End of London, he saw his compatriots. He saw other Jewish people. And he thought, well, there's no one taking the gospel to them. I speak the language. I understand the culture. They need something. And so he and a group of friends started what was to become CMJ eventually, the church's ministry among Jewish people. Now, Romans 1:16 says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek or Gentile. So that verb, apparently, I am told, is a continuous present. The gospel is first to the Jewish people. It's continuing to be to the Jewish people throughout time, and also everybody else. So that's Joseph Levi, who became Joseph Frey on his baptism. Next one. And we have a president at this time in CMJ, Church's ministry among Jewish people. He's called Ray Lockhart. Ray and Jill Lockhart worked in Israel for many, many years. They're a gracious, lovely couple. Next. But in those days, our first vice president was William Wilberforce, better known for the abolition of slavery. But he was just as keen that the Jewish people return to their land, and he came on board until his death. Next. Now, we have vice presidents too. We've got more than one, and you might recognize a couple of those. You might recognize Andrew White. You might recognize J. John. I don't know about the other two. Some might. Next one. And in those days, they bought a piece of land in Bethnal Green. Bethnal Green in the East End of London, where many, many Jewish people lived. They bought 5 acres of land and they called it Palestine Place. And Jewish people buying a place, calling it Palestine Place. We'll tell you why later. 5 acres. Today, we don't have 5 acres. We have this. It's a work office and it's in the middle of the country somewhere. And that's our headquarters. Next. Now, in our time, in the time when we began, there were lots of amazing people working with CMJ. And we had this man here called Lewis Way. It's a wonderful story. I'm not going to tell you it. Next slide. We also had Xander McCall, the Irishman. We also had Joseph Wolfe. And these men did wonderful things. But not just the men. William Wilberforce's wife, Barbara Spooner, she set up auxiliaries all across the British Isles to support CMJ. And all of their stories is in this book. It's a really must-buy, go-to book. 200 years. We wrote this, Kelvin did, for our bicentenary in 2009. So do purchase a copy of that. And you might recognize this man. Lord Shaftesbury came on board for 50 years with CMJ. And the next, he, along with Lord Palmerston, hatched a plan. The British government decided, Palmerston was the Foreign Secretary at the time, and they decided that they must set up a Protestant bishopric. And along with the Germans, they decided to do this. And CMJ were given the honor of choosing the first Protestant bishop to go to Jerusalem. And we chose this man, Bishop Michael Solomon Alexander. He's Jewish. And so he was the first Jewish bishop back in the land for 1,707 years. And he went there with all his entourage, his wife. I mean, I don't know how long it took them to get there, but they had 12 children I don't know if it was by the time they got there. Well, eventually. I think they were trying to set up their own tribe. But anyway, it must have been something going like that. But look how we go today and how you went when you went with Sharon. I mean, it takes us, 4.5 hours to get to Israel? We just fly in, we see the coastline, we see the whole area, and we're amazed. But in those days, it took a bit longer. Next. So what happened is we began to settle, and we began to build up different centres. The British government, meanwhile, had sent a consul out, and the consulate was set up. The consulate's house is, if you've been to Israel, it's the one that David Pelegi lives in. It's next door to the church. And what the British said to the Ottomans, who were the Muslims, was, can we build a Protestant church? And the Muslims said, no, we are Muslim. We don't want another church. Oh. So they said, but the consul, he's a Protestant. Can he have a Protestant chapel so that he can worship God the way he likes to? Oh, yeah, they can do that, they said. And so Christchurch was built. It's kind of like nearly twice as big as the consul next door, the consulate. So that's really quite funny. You can see it up there, the house. It's in the middle at the top there. So these are our 4 centres in Israel. You've probably heard about them already. There's the hospital that's now a school. There's Beit Bracha in Migdal, Prayer and Retreat Centre looking over Galilee. And there's Beit Emmanuel down in Jaffa, Tel Aviv. Next. So who are we? I've just put pictures of those of us who have come up here for this conference or come down to here for the conference, as Kelvin and I have, who work for CMJ. I've included Wendy Scott, who's the Chair of Trustees, simply because he's the Chair of Trustees. But you've seen Oliver, if you're in Glasgow, one of our evangelists, John, who's heading up the work at the moment, there's Sally Ann, who's here, and I'm there. And there in the middle is our new General Director, Aaron Amy, who will be speaking next year in our conference. He's the main speaker. And we like to think we're going to get really good Jewish roots teaching in our conferences, and we certainly will next year. Next. So Pippa Hewlett is another person who works with us, and she looks after social media and all that kind of side of it. Next. Now what do? We give back to the Jewish people what they gave to us. You know, a lot of Jewish people, next, hate us. Half the church hate us because they're replacement and they think they've, got rid of the need for the Jewish people. God finished with them ages ago. And next, go back. And the other Jewish people hate us because we are trying to get their scalps and take them away from being Jewish and make them a Christian. But Christian is just a Greek word for Messiah. You could say Messiahan, Christian Messiahan, and Jesus Christ is Mr. Christ. He's not Mr. Christ. He's the Christ. He's the Messiah. It's just the Greek-Hebrew difference. So it's a pity that the Greeks got the translation in, I think. But these guys, on my screensaver, I wrote down the CMJ Male Voice Choir, because I could just imagine them all singing praises to God, to Jesus. And what beautiful blend of gorgeous male voices there would be if they did that. So that's what I've got my eyes set upon. Next. Okay, so these are our evangelists at the moment. They're part-time, except Oliver, who's now gone full-time. And they work in different areas of Great Britain. You'll notice we haven't got anyone in Glasgow yet, where I believe there's quite a lot of Jewish people. So that's something to amend, isn't it? Next. So yes, this is something we do. Next. You can find that. So there's Oliver the other day in Glasgow speaking, and he was very good talking about the feasts. Next. So we also, all of us, teach on the feasts, and usually we put the S on the same line as feast. But so there's Moses parting the water for the Passover, and you've got the Passover lamb, and you've got some lovely pyramids made of matzah bread, and Sukkot. I think it's lovely in Israel because they take great pleasure in trying to do really sort of good sukkahs, and that guy with the camel has got a really brilliant one. So this is my back garden, and we keep making sukkahs every year. Next. Oh, yeah. And one of my granddaughters made an edible one with Grandpa in the kitchen. it was almost edible, except for the gingerbread sides were a bit hard to buy. They'd gone solid. But it's okay in Great Britain, as long as it's good weather. But what usually happens is it starts raining halfway through one of the meals at night, and you have to decant back inside the kitchen or something. Next. So that's a Shabbat meal in our house, with the kids blowing the shofars and so on, dancing. The miracle is always that they sit down again after the celebrations for the... Right, next. Oh, don't forget that the Shabbat, convocation of convocations, it's the main feast, for all the reasons that Aaron was saying earlier. What else do? We fight anti-Semitism. I look after CMJ France, and I invited Kelvin to come and do a tour in 2019. We went this year, but this was 2019, and he was doing some research on the Holocaust. And so we also, as well as the tour, visited 4 camps. This one, Petivias, the first ever children-only transport to Auschwitz. Naught, newborn babies to 17, sent to Auschwitz, pushed onto those trucks that you've all seen by the French police. Awful, awful, awful. I mean, I stood there and that was the worst thing I saw in the whole time. Next. And I have to say, though, since then we've seen French people who hid. Loads of Jewish people were saved. In fact, only 1/3 of the Jewish people went to be slaughtered, and the other 2/3 were saved, whereas it was normal. The rest of Europe, it was the other way around. 2/3 of European Jewry were slaughtered and 1/3 saved. Right, anti-Semitism in the church. He was a speaker from Finland we had, but next slide, we do fight anti-Semitism. It's so, so important to stand with the Jewish people, not just to say it, but to do it. Stand with them. We also do the Bible Come to Life exhibition, and if you haven't, I think you have in Scotland somewhere. It's been up here, yeah. It needs to come again. It's just brilliant, and it brings so many people in on a more casual level. They can sort of say, oh, yeah, I'd like to see what the temple looked like, etc. And they'll come in, and then we're waiting for them. So, and they can actually get the fun of dressing up. But it is a beautiful exhibition. We took it to France this last year. Next. There's a French boy blowing the shofar and loving every minute. Next. So look after the reps, the CMJ reps, and organise a conference every year. So I had Darrell Fenton in 2022 on teaching churches how to reach the Jewish neighbours. Next. We do deputation tours. That's one from June this year. But deputation tours is what we are in the middle of now. So I've got a whole month of a deputation tour organised for Kelvin Crombie, and we've just got to that bit. So if you know anybody else further downhill from Scotland, down in the south, down at the bottom of the hill, please will you take one of these and tell your friends to come to one of our meetings. The meetings will be about the 200th anniversary of CMJ's work getting into Israel. We started in 1823 and we're still going. And I think it's nothing to do with the people. It's all to do with God. Because how can such a disparate group of people, thousands of workers, over 200 years, manage to keep it going? Only because God has ordered it. Next. Edinburgh. That was you lot yesterday, listening to David Pileggi. Next. So that's another deputation tour in London. Next. And interviews are something that we've done with Jewish believers and other people. Next. And Bible weeks. We have Bible weeks every quarter. It's 3 in-depth studies on Jewish roots teaching every quarter. Next. We go to these sort of things. That's the AOG Leaders Conference. We've just been to Keswick for 3 weeks. Next. We also teach on Kesher, the Kesher course. That's a fantastic Jewish roots course. If you haven't done it, you really need to do it. It starts off with Jesus. Was it Jewish? Is he a rabbi? What, so it builds right up. Next. And Love Never Fails. That's another thing. There is, down in England, there's a group called Love Never Fails. And 22 Israel-focused ministries are on it. Up in Scotland, there's no reason why you can't come and join that, and perhaps you did do, but there was Yahad, which did a similar thing. Next. So, we take tours to Israel, and we have a lot of fun doing that. And my daughter said, take a teddy bear. because he'll partner with my school. So that was one thing we did. He partners with a Jewish school in London. Next. Now, this is the final slide. So why are we doing all this? Like I said, Jesus was Jewish. You know, you say that and half the church go, oh. And we're not trying to take anybody's scalp. Because think about it. We, the church, would never have known about the Messiah, who is our Savior, if the Jewish people hadn't evangelized us first. We're just returning the favor.